This is Warbird Radio.
And welcome back to Warbird Radio. I'm Matt Jolly, glad to be with you. And I'll tell you what, we've had a lot of great new episodes coming out, but this one just might take the cake. Bernie, if you don't know Bernie, he just goes by Bernie. That is his name. It's like Oprah, it's like Reba, it's like Cher, it's Bernie. Bernie, one of the biggest names in the Warbird business and has been for a number of years, one of the unsung heroes. But Bernie, good morning from the Weeks Hangar up there in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where you're looking at this P-47 that has stolen the hearts of literally millions of people around the world. Good morning. Glad you're here.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Dan, I'm doing great. How did you stumble into this opportunity? Because for the folks who don't know you, who haven't seen you, wrenching on airplanes and jumping in and flying them, sort of under the radar until the last few years. I mean, for the world stage. How'd you fall into this?
Well, honestly, I rode my bicycle to Nuttree Airport out in Northern California and had zero family that flew. I still don't have any family that flies but me. They all think I'm nuts. And when I was a kid, I just kept going to the airport. My mom used to take me out there. There was a little restaurant and a train, and there was a ramp that people would taxi up, and they'd get out and ride this little train over to the toy store and the restaurant. And it was a destination airport from, I don't know when they exactly built it, but I'll say 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. Then it closed down in 96 or so. And I just was fascinated by airplanes. Every chance I got, I'd ask my mom to take me out there, and it wasn't to ride the train, and it wasn't to go to the toy store. It was to go sit on the ramp on a picnic bench and watch airplanes take off and land and taxi up. And then I was about 11 years old, and I rode my bike out there one day. And it was probably 8 miles from my house, and I found a path, and I rode down this path. I was just a curious kid. And all of a sudden, through the eucalyptus trees, there was a whole nother airport that I had no idea it existed. Obviously, never being at a small general aviation airport, didn't realize that there was a place you had to get gas, a maintenance facility, hangars that airplanes were kept in, tie downs that airplanes parked in. I only ever saw this one ramp, and it just had constant traffic flowing through it. So I wandered over there and just never left. I started helping a guy that had a banner towing operation, and I was tying banners and helping him launch them and recover them. And I was about 12, 13, and another guy gave me a card and said, "Man, there's a glider port on the other side of town, 8 miles the other direction. They're always looking for help out there in the summertime running the wing." And most people know gliders don't take off by themselves. They need to get pulled by something. Airplane, helicopter, well, not helicopter, airplane or tow winch. So I turned around and rode out, another 8 miles the other direction, and got a job with them and worked for them for 2 years. And they moved facilities, and it wasn't practical for me to ride my bike 45 miles north of that.
But you thought about it. I mean, don't lie.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried to figure out how to do it. But at the time I'd ride my bike out there in the morning, and then I'd beg somebody after working 10, 12 hours to drive me back home into town. And I just didn't think that was going to work out.
So at what point do you realize in this scenario, and I because I love this story, and I've heard this from you, and I absolutely hang on it. But at what point did that light go off in the back of your head that said, you know what, the guy who flies this thing is pretty important, but the guy who works on it, there's something there.
Yeah, what happened is I walked in a hangar, and I was on my bike, and there was a guy there that's, "Hey, what are you doing?" And his big bifold door was shut, but the man door was open. And I said, "Hi, I'm Bernie Vasquez." He said, "Hey, Bernie Vasquez, like from the body shop downtown? I said, yeah, that's my dad. Oh man, I'm Steve Seghetti. I know your dad. Well, Steve Seghetti owned a local restaurant. It was a big restaurant in town. So he knew my dad. Come on in. Walked through his man door, and I looked right, and all I saw was his P-51 propeller and spinner.
There you go.
I couldn't spell P-51 back then. I didn't know what it was. I hadn't had world history. I didn't know anything about World War II. I'm a naive 11-year-old. I had no idea what this thing was. And I remember looking at it. He goes, oh, you want to sit in it? And I sat in it. And I remember looking at it, and I'm like, man, if this is what airplanes are, I want to do this. I want to fly one of these things. This is the coolest thing I have ever seen in my life. Fast forward about 13 years later, probably about 15 years later, I soloed that Mustang for the first Warbird I ever soloed, other than a T6, at the Reno International Air Races. So that was not only the first Mustang I ever saw, it was the thing that led me into a Warbird career. And in high school, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I think every young person that enjoys the fantasy of flight dreams of flying fighters. But I knew my personality was not going to work in a boot camp. I just knew the first time somebody started screaming and yelling and spitting in my face that it just wasn't going to click with me. And I was like, I really don't want to do that. And I'll be real honest. I'm not a brainiac. I was not into school. All I wanted to do was go to the airport. I would ditch high school anytime a cool airplane flew over. I remember playing flag football in physical education one day, and the TWA Connie flew over and landed at the airport. I took my flags off. I walked home, got on my bike, and rode to the airport and was there for 3 days because that airplane was there doing rides. And that was just the Collins Foundation would bring their airplanes in, and I'd just drop everything and go. And my mom, bless her heart, would get angry, but she knew something was going on inside that little brain of mine. And she never really balked at it. As long as I got good grades, I could do what I wanted.
You know, I tell these folks day in and day out who ask, they say, how do you get into this? How do I become that guy? And I say, you show up. You just show up. And
every time a young person asks me, how do I get to where you are? How do I get to do this? I said, you go to the airport, you never leave. And they look at me funny and they go, what? I said, you go to the airport and you never leave. And every time your phone rings and someone says, what are you doing tomorrow? I say, I don't know, sir. What are we doing?
Yeah. But you know, how many blank stares do you get?
I've probably had 2 individuals go, oh, I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, one of those young individuals is a kid named Ethan Green, and he's hanging out at Rod Lewis's, and he went to the airport and he never left. You know, and he's probably the next generation, you know, and there's a few young people that are looking at it, but it's kind of scary to me. 43 years old, and I'm still the kid in this game.
Yeah. Oh, I believe me.
There's
but you know,
no
you're
use.
doing it right. And the part of your story that I think is so valuable here is that you not only fly them, but you work on them. I mean, you can fix anything. And that is an invaluable skill in this business. And I'm guessing that just sort of happened naturally along the way. When you find the Mustang, you find these old cool Warbirds, and you know, the guy flying it, like I said, is pretty cool, but the guy working on it gets paid. So
yeah,
you know.
the thing about it is the guy flying it can't fly it unless the guy fixing it fixes it, and it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it's a double-edged sword. I could just show up with a helmet bag, get in, and go fly it, and break it, and say, "Hey, it's broken." That's one way to do it. For me, I get in it, I fly it, I break it, then I have to go fix it. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. It can make you tired at times because you're doing it all. You're not only flying it, but you're fixing it. But honestly, I don't know how somebody gets in anything. a J3 Cub to an F4 Phantom without understanding how it works.
Well, especially today. Yeah, especially today.
Yeah. And the the maintenance side for me is obviously I spoke of my father who had a body shop. That must be something that runs in the blood. So I think the mechanical side of it for me, I was always that kid that got a toy and took it apart and tried to put it back together. Sometimes I succeeded, sometimes I failed, but I still did it. So for me, it was always a curiosity of how things worked. And the maintenance side of the stuff is, that's my business. That's where I make money and provide for my wife and kids. And that's also a double-edged sword, because I spend 8-10 hours a day in the hangar, and then I go home and my 3-year-old goes, Dad, I want to go flying. And it's like,
Isn't it
I
great?
want to go back down to the hangar and open the hangar door and push a Cub out and go fly. But I've got to embrace that while he wants to do it and promote it. And honestly, it helps me I can make up a million excuses on why not to go do something, i.e. fly, because I'm tired. I've been working on him all day, blah, 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 blah. Every time he looks at me and says he wants to go flying, okay.
Yeah, that 9-year-old boy living inside of you, though, gets on his bike and goes down there and is ready to go. Let's talk about your week real quick, because I don't want to keep you. You've got to come back and be on the show again. You please do. But let's talk about your week.
This is my only day off.
Yeah.
At Oshkosh. I'm literally sitting behind. I'm in the Weeks hangar in a chair, sitting behind Thunderbird, looking underneath the wing at the P-47, and then the other wing looking at the Corsair, and going, how in the world did I ever get in this position? How have I been this blessed?
Well, you kept showing up, and I think it's great. The airplanes that you flew there, you started out flying some, you flew all kind of stuff. Just give us the list of stuff that you flew to AirVenture this year.
I started out with Lewis Energy's FG-1D. I went down to San Antonio. I'll back up. I flew Scott Slocum's Baron to Breckenridge and dropped it off for some repairs. He picked me up and took me down to San Antonio. I got in Lewis Energy's FG-1D, did a test hop in it, a couple of those, and then filled her up and flew to Oshkosh and dropped it off. And I was stopping for gas in Tulsa at another friend's place, the Sea Fury that I flew last year. I stopped to see Don Chappell. And while I was sitting there, I texted a buddy from Rare Aircraft, Ben Redmond, and said, hey, what are you doing today? And I actually called him, and he denied my call. And he texted me in the air, dropping the first airplane off at Oshkosh. And I said, I can be there in 2.5 hours. Will you wait for me, and you can give me a ride back? He said, oh, that'll work out perfect. My wife's in the Bonanza. She'll take us back. So I land. I got here 10 minutes after they got done tying down their airplanes, securing their camp, securing their line in vintage parking. We hopped in the Bonanza and we went back to Faribault, Minnesota. And while we were there, I said, hey, man, you're taking like 4 airplanes there, right? He goes, yeah. I go, well, do you want to take 2 tomorrow? And he goes, man, I thought you'd never ask. And I go, oh, you were already planning this. It was the second you said you were going to be there, I already went, ooh, he can take 1, I can take 1, my wife can pick us up, and then I only have to take 1 more and go there and stay. So that was Monday. Tuesday I hopped in a Waco, and he hopped in a Stinson, and we trucked on over to Oshkosh, which for me was the first time I've ever flown an open cockpit biplane in Oshkosh. Granted, the waiver wasn't going, it wasn't that busy, but it sure was cool to look down and see everything that I've never seen, because I'm always going 200 and something miles an hour over this place.
Terrible problem to have, Bernie. I mean, I feel so badly for you.
It's a rough life. Somebody's got to do it, though. So then his wife picked us up, and we did have a rough ride home. We were trying to get to Bemidji because I needed to test fly the P-47. They'd done some work to it. They'd finished the paint. Plan was to go to Bemidji, but man, we just couldn't get there. There was thunderstorms every direction we went. We were bucking 40 to 60 mile an hour headwinds. We had to stop for gas. We decided, all right, we're going straight to Castleton, North Dakota, because that's where Thunderbird and the P-47 both got painted at Custom Aircraft Refinishing. So we said, they're going to be putting the Thunderbird together. We'll just go there. So they dropped me off there. They beat feet back home before Thunderstorm got to Faribault. Spent the next day putting Warren's airplane back together and finished putting the fillets and fairings and stuff on. And I mean, I don't know if you've come by this airplane yet, but one of the things we're hoping somebody writes an article and says, hey, did you catch a whiff of that blue Mustang?
Yeah. Well, it's already been done.
Has it?
Yeah. Steve Bridgewater came on and I was talking about it. He said, if you're downwind, you can literally smell it curing. He said it
was so wet. We started to put fairings on when I got there, and we all looked at each other and said, I think we probably ought to go to the hotel. And there's a whole nother story. This is how things work. We're in Castleton, North Dakota. What in the world? Fargo's 5 miles away, 10 miles away, whatever it is. You start calling hotels. You can't get a hotel in this town. There is no hotels. There's some wrestling tournament going on.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we going to do? We're going to sleep on the floor?
Going to drive over to, yeah, Kent's got a motorhome somewhere. You know, you're going to drive over there and find somewhere to sleep. So.
Casey Odegaard calls and says, hey, my camper's in the hangar. And Warren loved sleeping on couches and FBOs. So he slept on the couch. I slept in the camper. It was great. So we got up the next day, finished Warren's airplane. I took off out of there. He took off in his Mooney Mustang, took off out of there, went to Bemidji. We flew the rest of the time off of it, hopped in the P-47, did a couple test flights on it, fixed a couple things. And then I brought the P-47 over on for Saturday, and Warren picked me up. And same thing. We were going to bring Thunderbird over Saturday, and just storms popped up everywhere. And we just looked at each other and went, why are we going to fight that hard to get there and then worry about it being outside? So we got up Sunday morning, waited for the fog to lift. The Air Corps guys got in their Bonanza. We got in the Mustang and beat feet over here. And I guess the rest is history.
The rest
now
is
I
history.
just got to figure out. I got to figure out how to get them all back home.
Well, you and Ben will work that out. I have no doubt. But man, what a great story.
Ben's on his own. I'm already, I checked that box.
The good deal ferry is gone. So,
absolutely.
Oh man, Bertie, what a week. Well, listen, thanks for spending a few minutes with us this morning. I mean, seriously.
Oh, anytime.
Golly, what a story and what a life. We're going to be sitting back. We're going to be watching and waiting to see all that hardware. Somebody asked me, they said, why would Rod Lewis bring a Connie all the way from Texas to Oshkosh? I said, to carry home all the trophies.
Not only carry home the trophies, but he brought it all the way from California.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, you got to, yeah, absolutely. What a guy.
Hey, they needed to break in the engines, and what better way to do that than put 7 hours on them?
That's right. And I'm hoping that we're going to have an update from the Hintons when everything settles down. You know, they've been working a little bit of overtime out there, trying to finish all that stuff. Just a little bit. Trying to finish all that stuff up. So
the Oshkosh Thrash. Now the next thing they get to do is the Reno Thrash.
Oh gosh, yeah, one last time at Reno. So we'll see where we'll see how everything shakes out with that. But listen, Bernie, come back on. Please be a regular. We'd love to have you on.
Call me anytime.
All right, Bernie. Great to hear your voice. We'll be right back with more Warbird Radio right after this.
This is Warbird Radio. Reminding you that radio engines don't leak oil. They just mark their territory. This is Warbird Radio. Tune in.
And welcome back here to Warbird Radio. Matt Jolly hanging out here with you. We were talking to Bernie about his journey into Warbirds. And this story just is not complete without talking to Warren Pietsch, the owner of Thunderbird, but who has a very similar story to Bernie about showing up. And Warren, you're joining me from the luxurious accommodations of the back of a cargo trailer there at that big fly-in.
I'm in the shade and a little bit out of the noise of Oshkosh, so this is the time to get her done. Yep.
Well, listen, you and your brothers know well, I mean, the power of showing up. And I don't know how many times I've told young folks, they say, well, how do you get into this? How do you become one of these guys? And the story that I hear countless times is just like what Bernie was talking about. You just show up, and they don't believe me. And so many of them wind up leaving, but I know you and Kent and your brothers, I mean, you had very similar upbringings around an airport.
We did, and I guess maybe the difference between Bernie and I is that I grew up in an aviation family, and I was the youngest of three brothers. My next older brother was 7 years older than me, and I think when I was 12, just coming out of sixth grade, my dad took me out to the airport and made me start working. Well, I shouldn't say he made me. I got to start working, and it involved marking fields for spraying, and it involved washing airplanes and answering the telephone and interacting with people. And obviously the aviation education and the dreams started about that time. Actually, to back up a couple years, in 1968, Dad had a Starduster 2 that he'd built, and we went to the EAA convention in Rockford, Illinois at the time, and I saw Mustangs for the first time, and I went home and painted a wall of my bedroom blue, and I rented an opaque projector, or borrowed one, I guess would be a better way to put it. Projected a 10-foot Mustang in a wall and painted it silver and yellow tail and stuff, and I started dreaming. And at the same time, I was learning about airplanes and learning to fly, and spending all my time at the airport. I mean, it was, and it wasn't because I was forced to as much as it was because it was just the place to be for me. And I tell people when they come in, they go, "What's it take to do what you've done?" And I say, well, you aren't going to go to the lake, and you aren't going to be home on a weekend. You're going to just spend every day at the airport, and that's the way it's going to be. If you want to live an aviation life, then you got to get busy living an aviation life. And there's been a few people that have accepted that advice, I guess, and have gone on to success.
Amen to that. Let's talk about Thunderbird here, your latest restoration. I mean, it's just an incredible airplane.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've owned a few airplanes, and I've restored a few airplanes, but nothing to this magnitude. Obviously, with the Texas Flying Legends and the Dakota Territory Air Museum, I was honored to campaign those airplanes and manage them for the owners, and we still do. The Dakota Territory Air Museum currently manages Bruce Ames' collection, and there's to the Air Museum's point, there's about 60 airplanes on display there in Minot, North Dakota, and it's a beautiful museum. And we have one wing totally dedicated to World War II aircraft, and those are Bruce's airplanes that I manage and fly. And we've got 5 Mustangs and a Hurricane, a Spitfire, and a P-40, and a Wildcat, and a DC-3, and a Harvard, and a L5, and an L6, and there's just a lot of airplanes in there, that people can sure stop and look at. So now it's my turn to have an airplane, and I found this project. Jerry Beck and I were working together to find paperwork for A model projects that he was working on, and we were ferrying a couple of airplanes to the Cleveland Air Show, Corsair and a TBM, and we stopped in Oshkosh and talked to Gene Chase, and he told us about an airplane that had gone down north of Scottsbluff, Nebraska in 55 that he was working for the guy, and he thought it was an A model, and so I went looking and found out that it wasn't a C model, or it wasn't an A model, but in fact a C model, and then got some pieces and started doing some background research on it and found out it was actually Thunderbird, Jimmy Stewart's airplane that Jody Boner raced and Jacqueline Cochran set records in, and so I got pretty excited about that and started that project in '99 and collecting history and pieces and finding a little time here and there to dream and work, and to have it here at Oshkosh to debut down at Vintage as a vintage racer, and then move it down to Warbirds to be in the Warbirds in review in the Warbird Square. Pretty exciting stuff for me. I joke we were painting it, and it just came out of the paint shop last week, but I was joking with somebody about it, and I said, I was pulling the paper off, and I stood there for a second on the ladder while I was pulling the paper off of the propeller. And I went, "Hey, I'm not working on somebody else's airplane. This is mine.
This is yours." And it still smells like fresh paint, from what I've been told by a number of people.
Well, if they write an article here at Osh, if they write one about this airplane, I hope they entitle it did you get a whiff of the blue Mustang?
Yeah, right.
This thing's been gassing thinner off all week long out here. So.
Well, Steve Bridgewater, who came on in a previous episode we released this week, said the exact same thing. He said if you stood downwind, he said you could still smell it. He said it was just incredible.
Exactly.
So that is so wonderful.
Roy Kiefer from Castleton, North Dakota Custom Aircraft Finishes did the paint, and it's fantastic paint. And he did the paint on the P-47 also, and just did a beautiful job on both. And obviously, Air Corps Aviation has had the airplane for 3 years now, and they did a wonderful job of completion. And Tri-State Aviation provided a lot of the fuselage and tail structure, and that was actually a Jerry Beck project that Jerry had started on in 2004 and had gotten pushed in the back of the warehouse and bought that, and Odegaard Wings built the wing, and so it's a community airplane. It's everybody's airplane. It's not just mine. It tells stories about 3 great American veterans and the records in aviation that they were involved in after the war, and I'm proud to tell those stories and stand next to the airplane.
I'm just proud to know you and your brother and the whole Pietsch family. What a great group, and Bernie too. I've got to just ask as we wrap things up here, because knowing you have a plan. What's your plan and your dream for the airplane?
For this airplane, or
for Thunderbird? No, for Thunderbird.
Yeah. Well, it's going to go back home and be in the museum. Probably go to Reno, and I'm sure we'll be out campaigning it next summer. Right now the plan is to let the paint dry. How's that?
I like it.
on both of us, me and the airplane.
There you go. Well, congratulations on a huge success, and man, I'm just looking forward to seeing you at a show here real soon, Warren. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
All
Great
right.
talking to you.
Well, there you go. Bernie V and Warren Pietsch. I'm telling you, 2 of the greatest guys in the Warbird business. Keep showing up. I'm telling you, just show up. Your life will change. And I love what Warren said about if you want to live an aviation life, that get busy, live in an aviation life. If you're crazy about this stuff and you're listening to this podcast, I'm telling you, just start showing up. It gets harder when you get older, I'm not going to lie, but just keep showing up. Good things will come. We have a lot of new episodes in the pipeline. Like, I'm telling you, they're coming in quicker than we can keep up. So keep liking and following and subscribing to the podcast feed and to the blog. That's really, really important. I don't think we're going to do a newsletter, but we're going to do the blog post. And when a new episode comes out, I'll just email it to you. It'll come right to your inbox. So be sure to subscribe to the blog there on warbirdradio.com. Just put your email address in. I don't know if it's a blog or newsletter, whatever it is. Still getting a handle on it. So go on there, put your email address in, and we'll send everything to you. Not spam. It's not cluttered with ads. It's just great content. You know that, though, or you wouldn't be here. We'll keep cranking it out. My thanks again to Bernie and to Warren Pietsch for spending a few minutes with us on an otherwise extremely busy week. And, of course, to you for listening. So long for now, everybody.
This is Warbird Radio.